Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Matthew chapter 18. Now, this is going to be a very interesting study because we're tackling the subject of forgiveness. The disciples asked Jesus, in a sense, what is the um is there, I should say, a limitation of or on is there a limitation on forgiveness? Now, Jesus is going to be quite clear, um quite clear as to his standard for forgiveness. And I have seen people over time try to downplay the significance of forgiveness, or I should say, the significance of forgiveness, um, the significance of forgiveness as God is, as He sets the standard. Okay, so let's get into it. Let me pull up my screen here. Okay, I gotta find my. Here we go. Over here. Here we go. All right, so Matthew chapter 18, verse, was it verse 21? Oh, here we go, verse 15. Verse 15, okay. Verse 15. Verse 15. So, I'm on 14, isn't it? Okay. All right, all right, so Jesus kind of incites the conversation by, as he's talking about what would, um, not offending one of the little ones that believes in him. And um, and then he goes on and he talks about how, remember verse 13, well, actually starting in verse 12, that if a shepherd is shepherding 100 sheep and one goes astray, he leaves the 99 on the hillside, and then he goes and he finds that lost sheep. And I thought that was very interesting how, when I think about a lot of pastors today that think they're too big, too isolated, there are some thoughts about sometimes with ministers that they kind of really forget or omit or have lost thought of really what the purpose of ministry is. That you're so big, you're so isolated, you can't really interact, okay, with the sheep. Jesus actually says here, because remember, Jesus always interacted with people. And if you want to look at Jesus crowds as from a mega pastor's size, from a mega evangelist size, Jesus commanded large crowds, right? At times 15 to 20,000 people. And yet, and think about this, when he fed the 5,000 and the 4,000, Jesus himself was breaking the bread and then handing it to his disciples to give to the people. So Jesus was never isolated from people. Sometimes he would try to be alone to pray, but he was never isolated to people. Anyway, let me move on. Verse 15 says, if your brother sins against you, go rebuke him in private. if he listens to you, you have won your brother. But if you won't listen, take one or two more with you, so that by the testimony of two or three witnesses, every fact may be established. If he pays no attention to them, take to the church. Now, the word church here, as Jesus is using the phrase, he's not using the word church congregation. Okay. Then he said, but if he doesn't pay attention to the church or congregation, let him be as an unbeliever and a tax collector to you. Now, then in verse 18, I assure you, whatever you bind on earth is already bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth is already loose in heaven. And again, I assure you that if two of you on earth should agree about anything, any matter that you pray for, it would be done for you by my Father in heaven, where two or three are gathered in my name. He says, there I am among you. Okay. I am among them. I'm going to come back and unpack this. One, he says that if your brother, now some people try to use this to say, don't criticize people. Here's a good example. Let's say if I criticize a popular minister, and they would say, well, why don't you go to the pop minister? You know, they use that verse. But that's not what that verse is saying, okay? Notice he said, if your brother sins against you. So that's the topic, that your brother sins against you. Then he says, go to him private. So the first thing is don't put him on blast if he sins, but go to him private. And understand, we're talking about something that is a established sin, not just something you don't like about him or them, but it is an established sin. Okay, he sinned against you. And notice this, that your first objective should be to try to make it right, to try to win over your brother. Okay, that is the first thing you should try to win over your brother. I'm going to get to later talking about forgiveness because a lot of times offense happen in the church, whether it's a business, right? Offense, you know, somebody might have slandered you, right? In other words, something they did to you. So then he says, go and rebuke him. You know, hey brother, you sinned against me. And notice he says that we should do that we always should correct it. In our society, for some reason, we always like to try to downplay wrongdoing. Don't say anything, but we should. And then he says, if he listens to you, you have won your brother. That is the objective there. You have won your brother. But now he says, but if you won't listen, then take two or more, so that in the testimony of two or three witnesses, every fact may be established. Now, this was something that was cited in the law to establish every fact. They still take somebody's word for it. One of the worst things you could do is just only take somebody's word for it. Even if that person is an honest person, they could be wrong. So in other words, he says, establish it on two or three witnesses. And then he said, if you don't pay attention to the two or three witnesses, then take it to the congregation. And then he said, if you don't pay attention to the congregation, let him be like an unbeliever. Now again, this is a sin, an established sin. Okay, not just attitudes that you like. Now, it's kind of, and by the way, and this is kind of within the congregation. This is not something that is to be adjudicated or that should be adjudicated in a law, in a court. Okay, and even the Jews here had limitations on what they could and couldn't do. We're going to see that later. That Jesus, they had to go to Pilate to get Jesus crucified. All right, but this is kind of small matters. Nevertheless, A wrong happened. He sinned against you. A wrong happened. Now, another, but the wrong, by the way, is a sin, an established sin, right? So, you know, maybe he stole something. Maybe he defrauded you. That happens a lot in the Christian church. That a Christian will go to a brother, a fellow Christian, to have work done for them, only to be defrauded. Contractors do it all the time. Contractors will, and just a word to the wise, never give a contractor money up front. You almost guarantee you're not going to get that money. Okay? If it's a legitimate contractor, they should have this, and the kind that you want to do business with, then you should, they should have themselves established. If not, you don't want to deal with them. I have been burnt many a time. So not many times, but I've been burnt enough that it hit the pocketbook. Okay, work out some other way. Because on the other hand, too, there are contractors that in good faith do work and then to be stiff by their customers. So in other words, now, so you got two sides, right? How do you adjudicate that? Well, one, go to them and then take 2 or 3 witnesses, and then he says, if they continue, now get this, in the sin. So if they continue in the sin and they are stubborn, then ultimately in the sin, okay, ultimately then he says it could result to, but not limited to, um, again, being put out of the church, right? Being excommunicated from the church. Okay, so so now look at this. He says, if he pays no attention, tell it to the church. But if he doesn't pay attention, even to the church, let him be as an unbeliever or a tax collector. In other words, treat him as an unbeliever. You know, keep distance. And then verse 18, I assure you, whatever you bind on earth is already bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth is already loose in heaven. Now, I have to stop because one of the things here that unfortunately a lot of people have been taught that this is a prayer to be prayed, and they say that if you pray this prayer, it is called binding and loosening. And what I want to say is that that's not what this verse, I know we've been taught this, but that is not what this verse teaches. This verse does not teach that if you get together, here's a guaranteed method of prayer. You get a couple of people and say, well, what do you want? Well, I want such and such and such. And then you agree, and then God's going to answer the prayer. In other words, he wasn't talking about that. And notice this was talking about church discipline, okay? That this was talking about church discipline, not, you getting together and getting answered prayer, all right? So, all right. So, he says, so what is when he says, what do you bind? In other words, if you have a brother that has sinned against you, and you try to go to them, you try to win your brother, he refuses. And again, he sinned. That's the key word. He is persisting in sin, and he doesn't listen to you. He doesn't listen to the witnesses. He doesn't listen to the congregation. And then in a sense, he says, treat him as a tax collector. Now, it's funny because Matthew, the writer the letter here, I mean of the book, certainly knows what that means. He certainly knows how the general community treated him. They hated tax collectors. They were seen as traitors. They were also crooks. They would overcharge people for their taxes. And there was no appeal because, Rome didn't care. They got their taxes. And so they were hated. And so people avoided them. They didn't get invited to the cookout, the family gatherings. And that's what he's saying right here. And then he says, though, if you, whatever you bind on earth, then it's bound in heaven. Meaning this person, this discipline here. So he says, verse 19, again, I assure you, if two of you on earth agree about any matter that you pray for, it will be done for you. Meaning what? In the context here, the dealing of this person, this unruly person, this sinning person. Okay, so he says, again, I assure you, I assure you that if two of you on earth agree about any matter that you pray for, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For if two or three are gathered together in my name, I am there among them. So again, this is the context of, again, church discipline. We would call church discipline. Now, that's not to say you can't get together and pray. And I'm going to say this, you can't get together and then pray for one another, pray in agreement. I'm just saying that this particular verse here is not what was in view. That Jesus wasn't teaching this prayer formula here that, hey, I'm believing God for a new car. Agree with me. That's not what this verse is. All I'm saying. You still can pray for one another and agree with one another for a new car or a new house. Okay. Now, verse 21, then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how many times can my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Now, this is kind of interesting here. Now, remember Jesus said, if your brother sins against you. Now, Peter's asking him, how many times could my brother sin against me? Right? So Peter's still thinking about this. Right? How many times? Because you know that there are people that will push it, right? Now Peter says, how many times, how many times can I? And then Peter thought he was being very generous, right? Very generous. He says, as many as 7 times. Verse 22, I tell you, not as many as 7, Jesus said to him, but 70 times 70. Okay? 70 times 70. That's how many times you should forgive. Now, was Jesus saying keep count? Right? 70 times 70. Right? What would that be? 70 times 70 times 70. I know I should be better at my math there. But let's just see here. 70 times 7, isn't it? But 70 times 7. Okay. All right. So 490 times. I know I should have got that. But anyway, 70 times 70 or 490 times. So that means Jesus is saying that if your brother sins against you 490 times, then you can forgive you. Now, obviously, Jesus is not telling you to keep that count, right? As if a person reaches the 490 times that they're sinning against you, you've reached your limit. I am now free not to forgive you. Okay, I'm free. I don't have to forgive you. Okay, was Jesus really saying that? Okay, was he really saying that? See, the idea of forgiveness, okay, and I'm going to pick this up in the next study, but the idea of forgiveness here is what Jesus was talking about. And again, we're going to get more into this as we get into, again, why the forgiveness. Now, notice that standard right there. You're to forgive. And really, if you think about it, you ought to forgive as much as you need to forgive. All right, guys, we'll pick it up next time. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective, or the Bible Plain and Simple. And if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.